Ever been stared at like you're a smudge on a pristine, pricey tablecloth? That night in a private club in Washington, my sister's billionaire fiancé smiled and began barking instructions in an ancient language he was sure I couldn't follow. The room gave a low, polite laugh. I said nothing and let his own ego do the damage. Then I answered just enough to make sure they'd never look at me the same way again. My name is Sloane King, and at 32, I'd perfected the skill of turning myself into furniture. It was a necessary survival trick when you found yourself planted in the middle of the Beaumont Athenaeum, a private club in Washington, D.C., that reeked of old money, mahogany, and the kind of quiet judgment that could unravel you without anyone raising their voice. The ceiling rose 40 feet overhead, painted with frescoes of Greek gods weighing mortals, which felt almost too fitting for the crowd gathered beneath them. I was the mark on the expensive tablecloth. I was the smudge on the crystal wine glass. I stood near a marble pillar, clutching a glass of sparkling water like it was a lifeline, trying to make my breathing shallow enough that I did not take up too much of their air. This was my sister's night. It was the engagement party of the season. A union between the struggling King family and the astronomical wealth of the Ashford dynasty. Grant Ashford stood 20 feet away, the gravitational center of the room. At 37 years old, he possessed the kind of aggressive, manicured handsomeness that looked best on magazine covers and worst when viewed up close. Where you could see the cold calculation in the eyes, he was a tech billionaire, a man who moved mountains with algorithms. And tonight, he was holding court. He had his hand on the small of my sister's back, a gesture that looked possessive rather than affectionate, as if he were steadying a wobbly piece of expensive sculpture. Delaney looked radiant, but I knew the difference between a real smile and the one she was wearing. That smile was a shield. She was terrified. The room was filled with senators, lobbyists, and a specific delegation of international investors from the Mediterranean region that Grant was desperate to impress. They were the keys to his next massive liquidity event. I watched them with the habitual curiosity of my profession, though nobody here knew what my profession actually was anymore. To them, I was just the dull, underachieving sister who lived in a small apartment in Philadelphia and probably needed a loan. Grant caught my eye. A smirk touched the corner of his mouth. It was a predator's grin. He needed a prop for his next trick. He needed to show these distinguished foreign guests that he was a man of culture, a man of history, a man who commanded respect from everyone, even his future in-laws, especially his future in-laws. He raised his glass, gesturing for silence. The room obeyed instantly. The chatter died down to a respectful hush. Grant turned his body toward me, opening his stance so the investors could see the interaction clearly. He treated the space between us like a stage. "Sloane," he called out. His voice was smooth, practiced, projected perfectly to the back of the room. "You look thirsty. Perhaps you could help us with something." I stiffened. I did not move. Grant smiled wider. Turning to the heavy-set man with silver hair standing next to him, mocked her. "Al-Fayed." If I recalled the guest list correctly, Grant wanted to show off. He wanted to demonstrate his worldly education. He spoke, but he did not speak in English. He switched to an archaic, academic dialect of a trade language once used in the high courts of the Mediterranean, a precursor to modern diplomatic tongues. Dead to the common world, but kept alive in the dusty halls of the most elite, pretentious universities. It was the kind of language wealthy men learned just to prove they had time to waste on things that did not make money. Illa, fer mihi vinum, non est dignus ut inter nos stis. Girl, bring me wine. It is not dignified for you to stand among us. The sentence hung in the air, heavy and sharp. A ripple of polite laughter spread through the room. It was the sound of dry leaves skittering across pavement. It was the laughter of people who did not understand the joke but knew they were supposed to find the host charming. They assumed he was merely teasing me, perhaps quoting a poem or an old family motto. They laughed because they were rich, and Grant was richer, and I was nobody. I stood perfectly still. My face remained a mask of polite confusion. I did not blink. I did not flush. I simply looked at him. Grant mistook my silence for ignorance. He thought I was paralyzed by the confusion of a simpleton who hears a foreign sound and does not know how to process it. He thought he was safe. "Come now, Sloane," he said in English, his tone dripping with a faux benevolence that made my stomach turn. He chuckled, looking back at the investors. "My apologies. My future sister-in-law is a wonderful woman, but she is not exactly worldly. Sometimes I forget that not everyone had the privilege of a classical education." He was digging. He was grabbing a shovel and digging a hole in the middle of the ballroom, and he had no idea how deep it was going to get. I shifted my gaze slightly, just an inch, to look at the international delegation. They were not laughing. Dr. Al-Fayed was frowning. A woman next to him, Dr. Layla Nasser, whom I recognized from her papers on linguistic anthropology, looked distinctly uncomfortable. Her eyes narrowed as she looked from Grant to me. These were people who actually spoke the language, or at least understood its roots. They knew what he had said. They knew he had just called his fiancée's sister a servant and told her she was unworthy of standing in the room. They were not impressed by his intellect. They were repulsed by his manners. But Grant was too high on his own supply of narcissism to notice the temperature drop in that specific corner of the room. He only heard the sycophants laughing. He only saw me standing there, mute and plain in my beige dress, looking for all the world like a deer caught in the headlights of a Bentley. He decided to double down. The first joke had landed well with the Americans, so why not go for a second? He turned back to me, his eyes gleaming with cruelty. He switched back to the archaic tongue, but this time, he abandoned the pretense of a command and went straight for mockery. His accent was atrocious. He mangled the vowels, flattening the delicate sounds of the coast into hard, flat American tones. "Tak, tu es nihil, nemo te audit." Be silent. You are nothing. No one hears you. He grinned, waiting for the applause. He looked at me with an expectation of total submission. He expected me to lower my head, to shuffle my feet, perhaps to awkwardly walk away and hide in the bathroom while he explained to his guests that I was simple-minded but harmless. The silence that followed was thick. The air in the room felt pressurized, like the inside of a diving bell. I inhaled slowly. The scent of expensive perfume and roasted duck was overwhelming. I felt the familiar, cool slide of detachment wash over me. It was a sensation I had not felt in years, not since I left the academic circles of Europe, not since I buried that part of my life to come home and save my family from drowning in debt. Grant Ashford believed that power came from noise. He believed that if he spoke the loudest, if he stood the tallest, if he had the most money, he won. He did not understand that real power. The kind that survives empires is quiet. I took one step forward. The movement was small, but it was deliberate. It was not the step of a servant coming to take an order. It was the step of an equal entering the arena. The polite smiles in the room faltered. People stopped drinking. The ambient chatter died away completely, strangled by the sudden, inexplicable tension radiating from the center of the floor. Even Delaney looked up, her eyes wide with panic, silently begging me to stop, to just take it, to be the doormat they needed me to be. But I was done being a doormat. I looked Grant directly in the eyes. I let the silence stretch for 5 seconds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, long enough to make him blink, long enough to make his smile twitch. Then, I opened my mouth. I did not speak in English. I spoke in the exact same archaic dialect he had just butchered, but I did not mangle it. My pronunciation was flawless, the vowels rounded and open, the cadence singing with the rhythm of the old poets and the ironclad logic of the ancient trade laws. It flowed from me like water breaking through a dam. Erroneus es, non solum te audio, sed etiam mendacia tua video, et accentus tus, barbarus est. You are mistaken. I do not only hear you, but I also see your lies. And your accent is barbaric. The sound of my voice, clear and authoritative, hit the room like a physical blow. Grant froze. It was a comical transformation. The smugness evaporated from his face instantly, replaced by a slack-jawed shock that was almost pitiable. He looked like a man who had reached for a stare that was not there. He looked like someone had just reached into his chest and pulled the plug on his entire reality. He stood there, mouth slightly open, eyes darting from me to the guests, trying to comprehend what had just happened. He had built this entire moment on the foundational certainty that I was an idiot. He had bet his social capital on it, and now the table had been overturned. I wasn't finished. I held his gaze, refusing to let him look away. I could see the panic rising in his eyes. He realized, in that split second, that he had made a catastrophic error. He had not just insulted me, he had done it in a language that his most important guests understood perfectly. And now I had exposed him not just as a bully, but as an incompetent one. I turned my head slightly toward Dr. Nasser and the international delegation. I offered them a small, respectful nod, a gesture of peers acknowledging one another. Doctor. Nasser did not smile, but the corner of her eye crinkled. She raised her glass to me. A millimeter, a salute. The rest of the room was dead silent. The Americans did not understand the words, but they understood the tone. They understood the body language. They understood that the dynamic had violently shifted. They looked at Grant, waiting for him to retort, waiting for him to crush me. But he couldn't. He didn't know the language well enough to reply without a script. He had memorized a few phrases to show off. He was a tourist in a land where I was a citizen. You? Grant started in English, his voice cracking slightly. He cleared his throat, desperate to regain his footing. I didn't know you. I cut him off, not with words, but with a look that said, "We are done playing your game." I smoothed the front of my beige dress, the uniform of the invisible woman, which suddenly felt like armor. The wine. Grant, I said in English, my voice calm, low, and terrifyingly steady. I believe you were the one who wanted it. You might need it more than I do right now. I turned my back on him. It was the ultimate insult. I dismissed him. I dismissed a billionaire in his own club, at his own party, in front of the people he needed to own. Behind me, I heard the distinctive sound of a glass shattering against the floor. Someone had dropped their drink, or perhaps Grant had crushed his in his hand. I did not turn around to check, for the first time all night. I did not feel like a stain. I felt like the only clean thing in the room. But as I walked toward the edge of the crowd, feeling the eyes of 300 people burning into my back, I knew this was not a victory. This was a declaration of war. I had just humiliated a man who had enough money to buy my entire life and burn it for sport. I had just silenced the room, but I knew, with a sinking feeling in my gut, that the noise was going to come back, and when it did, it would be deafening. But for this one moment, in the golden light of the Beaumont Athenaeum, the only sound that mattered was the echo of his barbaric accent dying in the air, and the silence of a room forcing itself to look at me, really look at me for the first time, to understand why I stood so still in that ballroom, why I let the silence stretch until it nearly snapped. You have to understand where I started that day. You have to see the life I was actively trying to protect. The small, quiet existence I had built out of the wreckage of my own potential. 8 hours before I silenced a room of millionaires, I was sitting on a second-hand rug in Philadelphia, arguing with a preposition. My apartment was a shrine to things the modern world had largely forgotten. It was a fourth-floor walk-up in a brick building that smelled perpetually of boiled cabbage and floor wax. The space was small, barely 600 square feet, but every horizontal surface was covered in paper. Stacks of lexicons, printed manuscripts, and binding proofs formed a labyrinth around my desk. The only light came from a single window that looked out onto a fire escape. Filtering the gray afternoon light onto my laptop screen, I was working on a commission for the Harbor Wren Translation Bureau. It was a fictional name for a very real, very boring clearinghouse that farmed out technical documents to freelancers like me. I was currently translating an instruction manual for a centrifugal pump from German into English. It was dry. Soulless work. It paid the rent. It kept the lights on. It required 0% of my heart and about 10% of my brain. The other 90% of my brain was usually screaming. I saved the document and closed the laptop. The silence of the apartment rushed back in. This was my domain. Here. I was not the disappointing daughter or the poor relation. Here. I was Sloane King, a woman who understood the architecture of sentences better than she understood the architecture of her own happiness. I stood up and walked to the closet door. Hanging on the outside knob, still wrapped in dry-cleaning plastic, was the dress. My mother, Janice, had selected it 3 weeks ago. She had called it sensible. I called it the uniform of the invisible. It was a beige cocktail dress, the color of oatmeal that had been left out on the counter too long. It had a modest neckline, sleeves that cut off at an unflattering point on the upper arm, and a hemline that suggested I was afraid of my own knees. It was expensive, paid for by the credit card my mother was maxing out to keep up appearances, but it looked cheap because it had no soul. I touched the fabric through the plastic. This dress had one job. Its job was to make me blend into the wallpaper at the Beaumont Athenaeum. Its job was to say, I am here, but I do not matter. I am the background character. I am the footnote. My phone buzzed on the desk, vibrating against a stack of unpaid utility bills. The screen flashed, Mom. I took a breath, holding it for 4 seconds before exhaling. I needed to prepare my voice. I needed to sound grateful. I needed to sound like the dutiful daughter who was not currently staring at her reflection in the window and wondering who the tired woman looking back was. Hi, Mom, I answered. Sloane, tell me you are already on the train. Janice's voice was high and tight, vibrating with the specific frequency of anxiety she reserved for social events involving the Ashfords. The traffic into the district is going to be a nightmare. If you are late, Edwin will notice. He notices everything. I am leaving in 40 minutes. Mom, I said, leaning against my desk. The train takes 2 hours. I will be there with plenty of time to spare. Did you steam the dress? She asked. It wrinkles if you look at it wrong. And please, Sloane, wear the pearls I gave you, not that leather thing you wear on your wrist. The leather thing is a watch strap. Mom. It looks aggressive, she snapped. Then her voice softened, a sudden shift that was almost more painful than the criticism. Please, honey, just for tonight, you know how important this is for Delaney. Grant has invited the entire board. He is finally introducing her as the future Mrs. Ashford to the international partners. We cannot have any friction. I know, I said. I will be perfect. I will be quiet. And don't talk about work, she added quickly. If someone asks what you do, just say you are in publishing. It sounds better than freelance translation. It sounds more stable. We don't want them thinking you are struggling. It reflects poorly on Grant's generosity. I closed my eyes. Grant's generosity. The phrase tasted like ash in my mouth. I won't embarrass you, Mom. I promised. I know you won't, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. We just have to get through the wedding. Once they are married, everything will be easier. The debt, everything will be handled. We just have to play the part a little longer. She hung up before I could say goodbye. I put the phone down and looked around my apartment again. It suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a waiting room. I walked over to the bookshelf, bypassing the dictionaries and the technical manuals, and reached for a small, framed photograph tucked behind a stack of journals. I pulled it out and wiped a layer of dust from the glass. The photo was 10 years old. It was taken in a sun-drenched courtyard in Bologna. I was 22, my hair wild and uncombed, holding a thesis paper in one hand and a bottle of cheap wine in the other. I looked hungry, not for food, but for the world. I was a doctoral candidate with a full scholarship, being groomed by some of the finest linguistic minds in Europe. I spoke 4 languages fluently and could read 3 dead ones. I had a future that stretched out like a golden road. Then came the phone call, Dad's heart attack, the discovery of the gambling debts, the second mortgage nobody knew about, the looming foreclosure. I had come home for the funeral and never left. I took the freelance work because it paid fast cash to cover the immediate fires. I stayed because Janice fell apart, and Delaney was too young to understand the magnitude of the hole we were in. I traded the golden road for a beige dress. I traded my voice for a paycheck. And Delaney. My sister used to be the firecracker. She was the one who would sneak out of the house to go to concerts. The one who laughed so hard she snorted milk out of her nose. We used to eat cold pizza on the floor of this very apartment and make fun of the people who took life too seriously. But since Grant Ashford entered the picture 2 years ago, Delaney had been edited. That was the only word for it. It was as if someone had taken a red pen to her personality and crossed out anything that was too loud, too messy, or too real. She stood straighter now. She laughed quieter. She had stopped eating pizza and started eating foam and microgreens. She was becoming a perfect Ashford wife, a polished stone with no rough edges to catch the light. I missed her. I missed her even when she was standing right in front of me. I sighed and placed the photo face down on the shelf. Dwelling on the past was a luxury I could not afford. I had a train to catch. I went to the bathroom to change. I pulled the beige dress on. It fit perfectly, which somehow made it worse. I looked in the mirror. I looked harmless. I looked like a woman who had never had a dangerous thought in her life. I walked back out to the main room to grab my purse. My phone buzzed again. I assumed it was Mom, calling to remind me to wear lipstick or to check my shoes. I picked it up, ready to give another reassurance, but the number on the screen was blocked. I frowned. I opened the message. Be careful tonight. Grant isn't what he seems. There was no signature, no context, just 7 words glowing on the cracked screen of my phone. I stared at it. My thumb hovered over the delete button. It was probably a wrong number, or maybe a prank. Grant was a billionaire. Famous people attracted crazy energy. But I didn't delete it. I stopped. I engaged the part of my brain that Harbor Wren Translation Bureau didn't pay for. I engaged the linguist. I read the text again, not for the meaning, but for the structure. It wasn't a casual text. There were no abbreviations, no you for you. It was grammatically precise. The punctuation was correct. A period after tonight, a period after seems. The tone was not hysterical. It was not threatening. It was informative, imperative. Be careful. It was a command, but a quiet one. Grant isn't what he seems. Most people would say, Grant is a jerk, or Grant is cheating. But what he seems implies a facade. It implies a construct. It suggests that the public persona is a deliberate fabrication distinct from the private reality. This wasn't a text from a jealous ex-girlfriend. This was a text from someone educated, someone who knew him intimately enough to see the construct, and who was frightened enough to use a burner number. A chill went down my spine. Unrelated to the drafty window, my intuition, dormant for so long under layers of debt and duty, woke up. It pricked at the back of my neck. Tonight is not just a party, it whispered. I looked at my small, sensible clutch bag. It barely had room for my phone and a tube of lipstick. I turned back to my desk. I opened the top drawer and took out a small, leather-bound notebook and a fountain pen. It was a habit from my field research days. You never know when you will hear a dialect you need to capture, or a phrase that unlocks a culture. The notebook was my shield. It was the physical proof that I was an observer, a recorder of truths, not just a participant. I jammed the notebook into the clutch. It bulged slightly, ruining the line of the bag. I didn't care. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. The train ride to Washington, D.C. was a 2-hour slide from my reality into theirs. I watched the landscape change from the gritty industrial backyards of Philadelphia to the manicured suburbs of Maryland, and finally to the imposing white stone of the Capitol. The car was filled with commuters in suits, people discussing policy and margins. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, rehearsing my lines. Hello, Edwin. Lovely to see you. Hello, Celeste. Yes, the train was fine. So happy for Delaney. They make a beautiful couple. I work in publishing. Educational texts. Very rewarding. Just water for me. Thank you. Be invisible. Be invisible. Be invisible. I repeated the mantra like a prayer. I just needed to survive 4 hours. 4 hours of smiling until my face hurt. 4 hours of watching Grant put his hand on my sister's neck like he owned the deed to her spine. Then I could get back on the train, come home, and disappear back into my books. But as the train pulled into Union Station, shuddering to a halt under the high arches, the text message burned in my mind. Grant isn't what he seems. I stepped onto the platform. The air in D.C. felt different. It was heavier. It smelled of power and ozone. My heart was beating a strange, irregular rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was anticipation. It was the feeling you get when the barometer drops suddenly before a storm. I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking on the marble floor. I told myself I was just going to a party. I told myself I was just the sister, the extra, the background noise. But as I walked out into the cool evening air, hailing a cab to take me to the Beaumont Athenaeum, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap. Or maybe, just maybe, I was walking into the moment where I would finally stop running. I clutched my bag tighter, feeling the hard spine of the notebook against my palm. I was bringing a pen to a knife fight. I had no idea that before the night was over, that pen would be the sharpest weapon in the room. The taxi dropped me off a block away from the entrance of the Beaumont Athenaeum. Even the cab driver seemed to sense the invisible barrier radiating from the building, slowing down as if he were approaching a restricted military zone rather than a social club. The structure was a fortress of limestone and arrogance, bathed in uplighting that made the columns look like the legs of giants. I walked the remaining 100 yards, clutching my clutch bag tight enough to whiten my knuckles. The evening air in D.C. was humid, but as I neared the entrance, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The checkpoint was not a simple door. It was a filtration system. A man in a dark suit stood behind a velvet rope. He was not a bouncer. He was a gatekeeper of social currency. He had the eyes of a tax auditor and the posture of a statue. As I approached, he did not look at my face. He looked at my shoes. Then he looked at the hem of my beige dress. Then, finally, he deigned to look at my eyes. "Name," he said. It was not a question. "Sloane King," I said. He looked down at the tablet in his hand. He did not tap the screen immediately. He let me wait. He let the seconds tick by, knowing that for someone like me, every second of delay was a seed of doubt. Am I on the list? Did they forget me? Do I belong here behind me? A couple approached. The woman was wearing vintage Chanel, and the man wore a suit that cost more than my college tuition. The gatekeeper looked up, his face transforming instantly into a mask of deferential warmth. "Good evening, Senator, Mrs. Conway. Please, go right in." He unhooked the rope for them without even checking the list. They flowed past me like water around a rock, not even acknowledging my existence. I was an obstacle, a traffic cone in a beige dress. The gatekeeper turned back to me, the warmth vanishing. "King," he muttered, scrolling slowly. "Ah, yes, the sister. You are cleared." He did not unhook the rope. He simply stepped aside just enough for me to squeeze through. It was a petty, calculated microaggression. It told me everything I needed to know about my status for the rest of the evening. I was here on a pass, and that pass could be revoked at any moment. Inside, the Beaumont Athenaeum was a sensory assault of wealth. The walls were paneled in wood that had been harvested before the internal combustion engine was invented. The chandeliers were not just lights. They were constellations of crystal that refracted the room into 1,000 glittering shards. The air smelled of lilies, beeswax, and money. I navigated the room, looking for my place. In a setting like this, geography was destiny. Where you sat told the room how much power you held. The center tables near the stage were for the gods, the Ashfords, the senators, the key investors. The tables radiating out from there were for the lieutenants and the wannabes. I found the table with the place card reading, "The King Family." It was table 19. It was located in the back corner of the room, directly next to the swinging double doors of the service kitchen. Every time a waiter entered or exited, a blast of kitchen noise and the smell of reheating hors d'oeuvres would wash over us. It was a blind spot. From here, we could not see the stage clearly. We were obscured by a large decorative fern. I pulled out my chair. It sat unevenly on the floor, rocking slightly. This was not an accident. Grant Ashford did not make mistakes with logistics. This was a statement. He was telling the room that while he was marrying Delaney, he was not marrying her family. We were the help. We were being kept near the kitchen because that is where he felt we belonged. I sat down and opened my sensory receptors. I became the linguist, the observer. The room was filling up. I watched the ecosystem of the elite in motion. It was a fascinating, terrifying dance. The people here did not speak loudly. They did not gesture wildly. Power here was demonstrated by economy of motion. The most powerful men stood perfectly still, forcing others to come to them. They spoke in low tones, forcing others to lean in. I saw them then, the architects. Edwin and Celeste Ashford stood near the fireplace, holding court. Edwin was a tall man with eyes like polished flint. He did not smile. He assessed. He looked at people as if he were calculating their liquidation value. Next to him, Celeste was a vision in ice blue silk. She was smiling, but it was a terrifying expression. It was the smile of a shark that had just eaten. She touched the arm of a congressman's wife, a gesture that looked gentle but was actually a way of pinning the woman in place. And then I saw Delaney. My sister was standing near the Ashfords, but not with them. She was positioned slightly behind Celeste, like a lady in waiting. She was wearing a dress that must have cost $50,000. It was encrusted with diamonds that caught the light with every breath she took. Her hair was sculpted into a wave that defied gravity. She looked breathtaking. But I was not looking at the dress. I was looking at her body. Her shoulders were pulled up toward her ears, the muscles of her trapezoids tight as bowstrings. Her neck was stiff. Her hands were clasped in front of her, the knuckles white, and her smile, it was locked. It was a muscular contraction, not an expression of joy. It was the smile of a woman who is afraid that if she relaxes her face for 1 second, she will shatter. I wanted to run to her. I wanted to grab her hand and drag her out the side door, but I couldn't. The distance between table 19 and the fireplace was only 50 feet, but it might as well have been a minefield. I scanned the rest of the room, looking for anomalies. That was when I spotted the woman with the silver hair. She was seated at a large round table near the front, surrounded by a group of men speaking a mix of French and Arabic. They were the international delegation. The whales Grant was trying to harpoon tonight, but this woman was different. She was not drinking. She was not engaging in the performative laughter that the men were. She was watching. Her eyes moved across the room with a laser-like intensity. She noted the seating arrangements. She noted the way Edwin ignored his wife. She noted the way the waiters scurried with fear in their eyes. She was reading the room, just like I was. Her nameplate said Dr. Layla Nasser. I filed that name away. She looked like a variable in an equation that Grant thought he had solved. She looked dangerous. Sloane, oh, thank goodness. I turned to see my mother, Janice, flustering toward the table. She was breathless. She was wearing a dress that was too young for her and a necklace that was too big. The diamonds around her neck were massive, garish things that screamed new money in a room that whispered old money. Mom, you're late, I said, standing up to help her with her chair. I know, she gasped, patting her hair. The driver got lost. Can you believe it? Grant sent a car for me, a private car. She touched the necklace, her eyes shining with a frantic sort of gratitude. And look at this, Sloane. Celeste sent this over this morning, a loaner for the evening. Isn't it magnificent? The Ashfords are so generous. Truly, we are so blessed. I looked at the necklace. It looked like a collar. It's very shiny, Mom, I said neutrally. Don't be like that, she hissed, her smile tightening. We have to be grateful. Do you know what they have done for us? The debts? Sloan, the house, it's all gone. Edwin took care of it. We just have to be good. We just have to fit in. By sitting by the kitchen door, I asked quietly. Janice looked at the swinging door as a waiter burst out with a tray of oysters. She flinched, but then she composed herself. It's just a seating chart. Honey, don't read into it. We are family now. She believed it, or she had to believe it. The alternative was admitting that she had sold her youngest daughter to pay off her husband's gambling mistakes. A waiter stopped at our table to refill the water glasses. He was young, maybe 22, with a sheen of sweat on his upper lip. His hands were shaking so badly that the pitcher rattled against the glass. Easy, I whispered to him as he spilled a few drops on the tablecloth. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with terror. He looked like a rabbit who hears a hawk screech. I'm sorry, miss, he stammered. I can't make a mistake. Not tonight. It's just water, I said gently. Nobody is going to kill you. He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a vibration that barely carried over the kitchen noise. You don't understand. Last week, Marcus dropped a fork. Just a fork. Mr. Ashford didn't even say anything. He just looked at the manager. Marcus was gone before the dessert course. He fired a guy yesterday just for looking him in the eye too long. He said it was insolent. The waiter pulled back quickly as the kitchen door swung open again. He vanished into the crowd, leaving me with a cold knot in my stomach. I took my notebook out of my bag, shielding it under the table. I wrote down staff ruled by fear, arbitrary punishments, eye contact forbidden. I was building a profile. This wasn't just a bad boss. This was a tyrant who got high on absolute control. He needed everyone around him to be small so he could feel big. Suddenly, the energy in the room shifted. It was a physical sensation, like the air pressure dropping before a tornado touches down. The chatter didn't stop, but it changed pitch. It became more frantic, more performative. The double doors at the main entrance swung open. Grant Ashford did not walk into a room. He invaded it. He stood in the doorway for a full 3 seconds, letting the silence build, letting every eye turn to him. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He was handsome, yes, but it was the handsomeness of a statue, cold and carved. He began to move through the crowd. He didn't weave around people. People parted for him. He walked in a straight line toward the fireplace, and the sea of guests split. Men reached out to shake his hand, and he took them without breaking his stride. Bestowing his attention like a king tossing coins to peasants, I watched him approach Delaney. He didn't greet her with a kiss. He didn't smile at her with warmth. He reached out and took her by the elbow. I saw his fingers press into the soft flesh of her arm. It wasn't a caress. It was a claim. Delaney's posture stiffened even more. She looked up at him, her eyes searching his face for a cue on how to behave. Grant whispered something in her ear. I saw Delaney nod quickly, her face paling slightly. My mother let out a sigh of adoration. Look at them, she whispered, like a prince and princess. No, I said, my voice barely audible. Like a ventriloquist and a doll. Grant turned then, surveying his kingdom. His eyes swept over the room, over the senators, over the investors, and finally, inevitably, they landed on table 19. He saw me. He didn't wave. He didn't nod. He just stared. A slow, cold smile spread across his face. It was a look of pure, unadulterated anticipation. He looked at me the way a boy looks at an insect he is about to pull the wings off of. He knew I was watching. He knew I saw through him, and he couldn't wait to punish me for it. The trap was set. The audience was seated. And I was sitting exactly where he wanted me in the blind spot, by the kitchen, ready to be served up as the evening's entertainment. I closed my notebook and slipped it back into my bag. Grant isn't what he seems. The text had said. No, he was worse. He was a man who thought he had written the script for everyone in this room. He thought we were all just lines of code in his program. But he had forgotten one thing. You can't code a variable you don't understand, and he didn't understand me at all. The distance between the service table and the center of the room was only 50 feet, but optically, it was an ocean. From my vantage point in the shadows, I became a student of anatomy. I watched the way Grant Ashford touched my sister. A lover touches with the pads of their fingers. They seek warmth. They seek connection. Grant did not touch Delaney like a lover. He reached out and wrapped his hand around her wrist, his thumb pressing into the delicate bundle of nerves and tendons on the underside of her arm. It was a grip designed to steer, not to hold. It was the way a man holds a bridle. Delaney did not pull away. Instead, I watched a horrifying choreography of micro-adjustments ripple through her body. It was a performance so subtle that I doubted anyone else in the room could see it, but I had spent 20 years studying her. I knew her tells. When Grant glanced to his left to acknowledge a senator, Delaney immediately shifted her weight to her right foot, angling her body to showcase her profile, effectively becoming a decorative accessory to his conversation. When Grant tilted his head down to listen to an investor, Delaney dimmed the wattage of her smile by exactly 50%, receding into a respectful silence so as not to outshine him. She was not just reacting, she was anticipating. She was predicting his needs before he even vocalized them. It was the behavior of a battered thing. It was the behavior of a dog that has been kicked enough times to know exactly when the boot is coming. My stomach churned, a sour mix of anger and helplessness rising in my throat. Grant turned his head, his eyes cut across the room, bypassing the hundreds of guests, and locked onto me. The smile that touched his lips was devoid of humor. He raised a finger, a small, summoning gesture. I stayed seated. He widened his smile, turning it into a performance for the group surrounding him. He said something that made them chuckle, then gestured again, more insistently. "Go on, Sloane," my mother whispered, nudging my elbow. Her face was flushed with the vicarious thrill of being acknowledged. "He wants you. Don't be rude." I stood up. My chair scraped against the floor, a harsh sound that nobody heard over the din of the party. I walked toward them, feeling the weight of the beige dress, feeling the invisibility cloak shredding under his gaze. When I reached the circle, Grant did not introduce me. He did not say, "This is Sloane, Delaney's sister," a brilliant linguist. Instead, he held out his empty glass. "There you are," he said, his voice pitched perfectly to sound affectionate yet condescending. "Big sister, always lurking in the corners." The group laughed. It was a light, meaningless sound to them, but to me, the label Big Sister felt like a weapon. He was emphasizing my age, my spinsterhood, my role as the peripheral, unsuccessful sibling. "I need a favor," Grant continued, pressing the crystal tumbler into my hand. The glass was warm from his grip. "Doctor, Al-Fayed is asking for a specific vintage of scotch. The bartenders are overwhelmed. Since you are not occupied with guests, perhaps you could fetch it? It is the 25-year-old single malt, top shelf." He looked at me with eyes that dared me to refuse. If I said no, I was the rude, ungrateful sister making a scene at his engagement party. If I said yes, I was the servant. "Of course," I said. My voice was flat. "I would hate for anyone to go thirsty." "That is the spirit," Grant said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. It was heavy and patronizing. "She loves to be helpful, don't you, Sloane? It gives her a sense of purpose." My mother, who had followed me halfway across the room like a moth trailing a light, beamed. "She really does," Janice chimed in, her voice breathless. "Sloane is so supportive. She will get it right away. Grant." I looked at my mother. She was not trying to hurt me. She was just so desperate to please him that she would happily lay me down across a puddle so he wouldn't muddy his shoes. She was an accomplice to my humiliation, and she didn't even know it. I turned and walked toward the bar, the empty glass burning my palm. I could feel Grant's eyes on my back, enjoying the sight of my retreat. I secured the drink. I delivered it to Dr. Al-Fayed, who looked at me with a confusion that bordered on pity. Clearly wondering why a guest was doing the job of the waitstaff, I did not explain. I simply nodded and retreated back to the safety of table 19. But safety was an illusion. A shadow fell over the table. I looked up to see Edwin Ashford standing there. Grant's father was a man carved from granite and old prejudices. He pulled out the chair opposite me and sat down. He did not ask if he could join me. He simply occupied the space. He placed his hands on the table. They were manicured, spotless, and terrifyingly strong. "Let us skip the pleasantries, Ms. King," Edwin said. His voice was a low rumble, audible only to me. "I am a businessman. I value efficiency." "I appreciate efficiency," I replied, keeping my hands in my lap to hide the fact that I was gripping my notebook. "Good," Edwin said. He leaned in slightly. "Then tell me, what is the number?" I blinked. "I beg your pardon." "The number," he repeated, impatience sharpening his tone. "What do you want? What is the price to ensure that you and your mother remain manageable? We have already absorbed the debts. We have stabilized your housing situation. But I look at you, and I see a woman who thinks she is smarter than she is. A woman who might cause problems because she feels she has been shortchanged." He looked at me as if I were a line item on a ledger that wouldn't balance. To him, family was not blood. It was a transaction. It was a series of acquisitions and mergers. "I do not want your money, Mr. Ashford," I said. He scoffed. It was a dry, ugly sound. "Everyone wants money, or power, or access. Do not insult my intelligence by pretending to be virtuous. You are sitting at the children's table at a billion-dollar event. You want something." "I want my sister to be happy," I said. "That is all." Edwin stared at me. He searched my face for the lie. He looked for the avarice, the envy, the deceit. He could not find it, and that infuriated him. He did not have a framework for understanding someone who could not be bought. "Happiness is a byproduct of order," Edwin said coldly. "And order is maintained by everyone knowing their place. Grant is the future of this family. Delaney is his asset. You are—" He paused, looking me up and down with disdain. "You are a redundancy. See that you do not become a liability." He stood up abruptly, buttoning his jacket. "Enjoy the dinner. The catering bill alone costs more than you will earn in a lifetime." He walked away. I sat there, my heart hammering against my ribs. The air around me felt thin. I needed to breathe. I needed to get away from the noise, from the suffocating smell of lilies and hypocrisy. I stood up and slipped out through the swinging doors into the service corridor. The hallway was stark white, lit by fluorescent tubes that hummed with an angry buzz. Waiters rushed past me carrying trays of filet mignon, their faces tight with stress. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to make myself small, trying to find a moment of silence. I walked further down the hall, toward a quiet alcove near the emergency exit. I heard a voice. It was low, urgent, and vibrating with a rage I had never heard in public. "I do not care what the compliance officer says. You tell them to sign off on the valuation." It was Grant. I froze. I was standing just around the corner from where he was pacing. He was on his cell phone, his back to me. His posture was not the relaxed, kingly stance he held in the ballroom. He was hunched, aggressive, coiled like a spring. "Nasser is hesitating," Grant hissed into the phone. "I can see it in her face. She is sniffing around the translation of the liability clause. If that fund does not wire the capital by midnight, the bridge loan defaults. Do you understand me? We lose the liquidity leverage." I held my breath. My mind raced, translating the finance speak into plain English. "He is broke. Or not broke, exactly, but overextended. He was playing a shell game. He needed the international money tonight to cover a debt that was coming due tomorrow. The generosity he had shown my family, the wedding, the club. It was all a facade. It was bait to lure in the investors. "Just fix it," Grant snapped. "I will handle Nasser. She is just a woman. I will charm her or I will bury her. Just get the papers ready." He ended the call and shoved the phone into his pocket. He turned around. He saw me. For a second, The mask dropped completely. I saw the fear in his eyes. I saw the desperation of a man standing on a trap door. But then, the mask slammed back into place. The charm returned, but it was brittle now, dangerous. He walked toward me. The corridor was narrow. There was nowhere to go. "Sloane," he said. His voice was soft, silky. "You have a habit of appearing in hidden places. Don't you? It is almost like you are spying." "I was looking for the restroom," I lied. My voice was steady, but my knees were shaking. Grant stepped closer. He invaded my personal space, looming over me. He smelled of expensive scotch and aggression. "You know," he said, leaning down so his face was inches from mine, "I have always found that people who look for dirt usually end up getting buried in it. You should be careful. Sloane, it is a dangerous world for a woman alone." It was a threat, plain and simple. "Grant," we both turned. Delaney was standing at the end of the corridor. She looked pale, her eyes darting between us. They are waiting for the toast," Delaney stammered. "Grant, please, Father is asking for you." Grant straightened up. He adjusted his cufflinks, smoothing away the tension as if it never existed. "Coming, darling," he said. He looked back at me one last time. His eyes were dead. "Don't get lost. Sloane." He walked past me, brushing my shoulder with his. Delaney waited until he was gone. Then she rushed to me, grabbing my hands. Her palms were clammy. "What did he say to you?" she whispered. "Sloane, tell me." "He was just talking," I said, trying to pull away. "No," Delaney said. She squeezed my hands harder. Her eyes were wide, frantic. "Please, Sloane, I am begging you, do not stand out. Do not make him angry. He is very difficult right now. The pressure. He is under so much pressure." "Delaney," I said softly, "this isn't an engagement. This is a hostage situation." She flinched as if I had slapped her. Tears welled up in her eyes, threatening to spill over and ruin her perfect makeup. "I don't have a choice," she whispered. "You don't know everything. Just, please, be invisible. For me." She turned and ran back toward the ballroom, wiping her eyes before she hit the light. I stood alone in the white hallway. The hum of the fluorescent lights sounded like a warning siren. I reached into my bag and touched the notebook. I thought about the text message. Grant isn't what he seems. I thought about the phone call I had just overheard. Nasser is hesitating. Grant was building a house of cards, and he was using my sister as the foundation. If he fell, he would crush her. I realized then that my plan to just get through the night was no longer an option. I couldn't just leave. I couldn't go back to Philadelphia and translate manuals while my sister was being digested by this monster. Delaney was right about one thing. It was a trap. But she was wrong about the solution. Being invisible wouldn't save us. Being invisible was what got us here. I straightened my spine. I adjusted the strap of my beige dress. I was done hiding in the blind spot. It was time to walk into the light. The sorbet course provided a brief, chilled interlude in the suffocating heat of the evening. Waiters circulated with lemon basil palate cleansers. Their movements synchronized and silent. The room was loud with the clatter of silver spoons against crystal, masking the private conversations taking place at the edges of the room. I stood up. I did not ask for permission. I walked around the table and touched my mother's shoulder. "We need to talk," I said. Janice looked up, her spoon halfway to her mouth. "Now, Sloane, people are watching." "Nobody's watching us, Mom," I said, my voice low and hard. "We are at table 19. We could set the tablecloth on fire and nobody would notice until the smoke reached the senator. Get up." She hesitated, looking toward the head table where Grant was holding court. But something in my face must have frightened her. It was the first time in years I had looked at her not as a daughter, but as a prosecutor. She placed her napkin on the table and followed me. I led her away from the main hall, bypassing the service corridor this time, and found a heavy velvet curtain that concealed a small alcove near the coat check. It was dusty and smelled of old raincoats, but it was private. I turned on her before the velvet had even settled. "Why is he doing this?" I asked. Janice smoothed the front of her borrowed dress, avoiding my eyes. "I don't know what you mean. Grant is just— he is high-spirited. He wants everything to be perfect." "Stop it," I snapped. The command cracked like a whip in the small space. "Drop the act. Mom, I am not the neighbors. I am not the bank. I am the one who has been paying the electric bill for 3 years while you pretend we are still middle-class royalty. I just heard Grant talking about a liquidity crisis. I see the way he touches Delaney. I see the way Edwin looks at us like we are livestock he regrets buying. Why do we owe them so much?" Janice crumbled. It wasn't a dramatic collapse. It was a slow, pathetic deflation. Her shoulders slumped, and the frantic, bright energy she had been projecting all night evaporated, leaving behind a tired, terrified old woman. "It was your father," she whispered. "Dad is dead," I said. "His debts should have died with the estate. We sold the house in Jersey. We sold the cars. It should have been over." "It wasn't just the mortgage," she said, her voice trembling. "It was the business loans, the personal guarantees, the gambling. Sloan, he borrowed from private lenders, bad lenders. The interest wasn't 4%, it was 40%. I felt the blood drain from my face. "How much?" She shook her head. "How much? Mom?" I grabbed her wrists. "Tell me the number." $4 million, she choked out. I stared at her. $4 million. It was an impossible number. It was a number that didn't just ruin a life, it erased it. "When Dad died," she continued, tears finally spilling over, cutting tracks through her thick foundation. "They came for everything. They were going to take the pension. They were going to take the apartment. They were talking about legal action against me as a co-signer. I was going to prison. Sloan." "So Grant paid it?" I asked, the pieces starting to click together into a horrific picture. "He didn't pay it," Janice sniffed. "He bought it." The air left my lungs. "He bought the debt," I repeated. "He transferred it," she explained, her voice gaining a desperate speed as she tried to justify it. "He has a holding company, Quill and Anchor Holdings. He bought the notes from the banks and the private lenders. He consolidated it all. He froze the interest. He told us as long as we were family, he would never call it in." "A holding company," I said, the realization settling over me like a shroud. "It is not a gift. It is a leash." "He saved us," Janice cried, though she kept her voice to a harsh whisper. "We have a roof over our heads because of him. Delaney drives a safe car because of him. You were able to come home and just work your little freelance jobs without having to worry about the sharks coming to the door." "My little freelance jobs," I repeated slowly. "Is that what you think I have been doing?" "Just playing around." Then, the second realization hit me. It was sharper than the first. It was a memory. "The phone call," I said. 5 years ago, you called me in Bologna. You said Dad was sick. You said I had to come home immediately to help manage the estate." "You did," she said. "Delaney was already dating him," I said. It wasn't a question. Janice looked down at her shoes. "Delaney met Grant 6 months before Dad died," I said, my voice rising. "I thought they met at the funeral, but that was a lie. Wasn't it? You called me back not because you needed my help with the paperwork. You called me back because Grant wanted the whole set. He wanted the family contained." "Delaney loves him," Janice insisted weakly. "Delaney is a hostage," I shouted, then lowered my voice instantly as a guest walked past the curtain. I leaned in close to my mother's face. "She is working off a $4 million debt with her body and her life. That is not a marriage. That is indentured servitude." "I had no choice," Janice sobbed. "What was I supposed to do? Sloan, let them put me in jail. Let them put us on the street. I did what a mother has to do to survive." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had raised me. The woman I had spent the last 5 years trying to protect, trying to impress with my quiet competence. And I saw the truth. She wasn't a victim. She was a collaborator. You had a choice, I said. My voice was cold, stripped of all daughterly affection. You could have declared bankruptcy. You could have let us face the reality. We would have been poor. We would have struggled. But we would have been free. And Delaney would have been free. We would have been nothing, she spat back, a flash of her old vanity surfacing. We are nothing now, I said. We are pets. And you traded your daughter's life for a condo and a dress you have to return tomorrow. You didn't choose survival. Mom, you chose the easy way out for yourself. Janice stepped back as if I had struck her. You are cruel. You have always been cold. Sloane, that is why you are alone. That is why you don't understand sacrifice. I understand sacrifice, I said. I sacrificed my career. I sacrificed my life in Europe. I came here and made myself invisible because I thought it helped. But my invisibility didn't help you. It just made it easier for Grant to ignore me while he consumed everyone else. I realized then that my silence had been part of the transaction. A quiet, dull sister was part of the package deal. If I had been loud, if I had been successful, if I had been a threat, Grant might have hesitated, but I had made myself small, and in doing so, I had greased the wheels of this machine. Janice wiped her face, composing herself with terrifying speed. I am going back to the table. Dessert is being served. Fix your face. Sloane, do not ruin this. She slipped out from behind the curtain. I stood there for a moment, shaking. The rage was no longer a hot, fiery thing. It had crystallized into something hard and sharp, like a diamond. I stepped out of the alcove. I needed water. My throat felt like it was full of sand. As I walked toward the bar, a waiter collided with me. It was the young man from earlier, the terrified one. Whoa, easy, I said, steadying him by the elbows. He was trembling so hard his teeth were almost chattering. I'm sorry, he stammered, his eyes darting around the room. It is okay, I said. Just breathe. He looked at me, and I saw a desperate need to unburden himself. He was carrying too much fear for one person. He is screaming at the manager in the kitchen, the waiter whispered. Mr. Ashford, he threw a plate. Why? I asked. The signature, the waiter said. He keeps saying he needs the signature on the addendum before the cake is cut. He says someone is stalling. He says if he doesn't get the papers signed tonight, the deal dies. Who is stalling? I asked. I don't know, the waiter said, looking over his shoulder, but I heard him say, the old witch and her dogs. He meant the foreign guests, the lady with the silver hair. Dr. Layla Nasser. The pieces slammed into place. Grant wasn't just showing off for the international delegation. He needed them to sign something, a deal, a funding agreement, and he needed it tonight, right now, amidst the champagne and the flowers, so they wouldn't read the fine print. But Dr. Nasser wasn't signing. That was why Grant was so on edge. That was why he was lashing out. And the text message, Grant isn't what he seems. Someone knew. Someone inside Grant's circle knew the house of cards was falling, and they were trying to warn us, or maybe they were trying to find an ally. I looked across the room. I saw Dr. Nasser sitting at her table. She was not eating the dessert. She was reading a document on her phone. Her brow furrowed. I looked at Delaney. She was sitting next to Grant, who had returned to the table. He had his hand on the back of her neck again. He was smiling for the cameras, but his fingers were digging into her skin. He had bought my father's debt to own us. He was using that ownership to force a marriage, and he was using the marriage as a stage to close a deal that would save him from his own financial incompetence. We were not family. We were collateral. But collateral has a funny way of becoming a liability if it stops behaving like an asset. I reached into my bag and touched the spine of my notebook. I had spent my life translating other people's words. I had spent the last 5 years translating my mother's lies into palatable truths. Tonight, I was done translating. I looked at the waiter. Go, I said gently. Stay out of his way. He nodded and vanished into the crowd. I took a deep breath. The air still smelled of lilies and money, but now I could smell something else underneath it. Rot. I wasn't going to go back to table 19. I wasn't going to sit in the blind spot. I had a debt to pay. All right, but it wasn't $4 million. It was a debt to the sister I used to know. The sister who used to laugh. I was going to unlock her cage, and I was going to use Grant Ashford's own keys to do it. I started walking, not toward my seat, but toward the ladies' room where I had seen Delaney heading moments before she was intercepted. I knew she would try to go back there. She always hid in the bathroom when the panic attack started. It was time for a sisterly chat, the kind that ends with blood on the floor, or freedom. The ladies' room at the Beaumont Athenaeum was less of a restroom and more of a sanctuary, designed for the ritualistic maintenance of female perfection. The walls were lined with pink marble that had probably been quarried before the discovery of electricity. The lighting was calibrated to a soft, golden hue that erased wrinkles and fatigue, making every woman who looked in the mirror see a younger, happier version of herself. It was a room built for lies. When I pushed through the heavy mahogany door, the silence was absolute. The roar of the party, the clinking of glasses, and the drone of networking vanished instantly, replaced by the hum of an expensive ventilation system and the scent of fresh orchids. Delaney was standing at the row of sinks. She was the only one there. She was gripping the edge of the marble counter so hard that her knuckles were white, matching the porcelain. Her head was bowed, her breathing coming in short. Ragged gasps that she was trying desperately to silence. She looked like a diver who had been held underwater for 2 minutes and had just broken the surface. I let the door click shut behind me. The sound was sharp, like a lock engaging. Delaney flinched. She spun around, her hand flying to her chest. When she saw it was me, her shoulders dropped. But the tension in her eyes did not leave. It simply shifted from terror to a frantic sort of performance. "Sloane," she breathed out, forcing a laugh that sounded like glass breaking. "You scared me. I was just refreshing. The humidity in there is terrible, isn't it? My hair feels like it is falling flat." She turned back to the mirror, reaching for a tube of lipstick with a hand that was trembling so violently she couldn't get the cap off. "Stop it," I said. My voice was quiet, but in the acoustic perfection of the tiled room, it sounded loud. "Stop what?" Delaney asked, staring at her reflection, refusing to meet my eyes in the glass. "I am just fixing my makeup. Grant likes it when I wear the red. He says the pale shade makes me look washed out." "He says," I repeated, walking further into the room until I was standing right behind her. "He says, he wants, he likes, do you hear yourself? Delaney. You do not have a single sentence that starts with I. I am fine. Sloane," she said, finally popping the cap off the lipstick. She applied it aggressively, missing the line of her lip and having to wipe it away with her thumb. "I am fine. I am happy. It is a big night. Nerves are normal. Every bride has nerves." "This is not nerves," I said. "This is terror." "I am fine," she said again, louder this time. It was a mantra, a spell she was casting to keep the walls from collapsing. I reached out and grabbed her hand, the one holding the lipstick. I didn't squeeze. I just held it still. "Mom told me about the debt," I said. Delaney froze. The lipstick fell from her fingers and clattered into the sink, rolling around the porcelain bowl like a dropped bullet. She looked at me then. The mask of the happy bride dissolved, revealing an exhaustion so deep it looked like bruising. "She shouldn't have done that," Delaney whispered. "It doesn't change anything." "It changes everything," I said. "It means this isn't a marriage. It is a foreclosure. You are the asset he is seizing to settle the account." Delaney pulled her hand away from mine and crossed her arms over her chest, a defensive posture I hadn't seen her use since we were teenagers getting scolded for breaking curfew. "You don't understand the world. Sloane," she said, her voice trembling. "You think everything is black and white. You think there are heroes and villains. But out here, In the real world, it is just survival. Grant saved us. He stepped in when nobody else would. He didn't step in, I countered, stepping closer. He stepped on us. There is a difference. A savior doesn't hold the receipt over your head every time you try to breathe. A savior doesn't isolate you from your family. He doesn't make you sit by the kitchen while he parades you around like a trophy. He loves me, Delaney said, but her eyes were wet. He has high standards. He wants me to be better. He pushes me because he sees my potential. That is the language of a cult. Delaney, I said brutally. That is what they say in the conditioning camps. He pushes me because he loves me. No, he pushes you because he likes to see you stumble. He likes to see you scramble to please him. It is not love. It is training. You are a show pony, and he is breaking you. Delaney's face twisted. A flash of anger cut through the fear, the defensive anger of a victim who cannot afford to believe the truth. What do you know? She snapped, turning to face me fully. What do you know about love or relationships, or sacrifice? You have spent the last 10 years hiding in libraries with your nose in a book. You translate words. Sloan, you don't live life. The words landed with precision. She knew exactly where to hit. She knew my insecurity. The fear that I was just an observer, a ghost in my own life. I know enough to know when someone is being erased, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the sting. You have the luxury of morality, Delaney said, her voice rising. You get to sit in your little apartment and judge us. You get to be the poor, goal scholar. Must be nice. But someone had to pay the bills. Sloan. Someone had to deal with the creditors calling at 3 a.m. threatening to take the house. While you were in Europe drinking wine and studying dead languages, I was here drowning. I came back. I argued. I dropped everything and came back the second Mom called. You came back too late, Delaney cried out. The silence that followed was heavy. The air conditioning hummed, indifferent to our ruin. I looked at her. What do you mean? Delaney looked away, biting her lip. She looked like a child who had said too much. The phone call, I said slowly, my mind racing back to that day in Bologna. The sunlight on the piazza, the ringing phone. Mom called me 5 years ago. She said Dad was sick. She said things were bad. I looked at Delaney's profile. You were already with him, weren't you? Before I came home, you knew Grant before the funeral. Delaney didn't answer. She picked up the lipstick from the sink and started wiping it off with a paper towel, focusing on the task with manic intensity. Delaney, I pressed. Why did you really ask Mom to call me back if Grant was already saving us? Why did you need me here? Because I needed a buffer. She exploded, spinning back to me, tears streaming down her face now, ruining the perfect powder. Because when it was just me and Mom, it was too much. I thought if you were here, if the smart sister was here, maybe he would respect us more. Maybe he would back off. Maybe you would figure out a way out of the contracts. She laughed, a bitter, jagged sound. But you didn't. You just folded. You put on the beige dress and you faded into the background just like he wanted, and I was left alone with him anyway. I didn't know, I whispered. I thought I was helping by being quiet. I thought I was keeping the peace. There is no peace, Delaney said. There is only compliance. Then stop complying, I said. I reached out and took her by the shoulders. Her body was rigid, vibrating with tension. We can leave. Tonight. Right now. We walk out the back door. I have some savings. Not much, but enough for tickets. We go to Philadelphia. We figure it out. And the $4 million? Delaney asked, her eyes wild. He will sue us. He will destroy Mom. He will put us in jail. Let him try, I said. Let him take us to court. We will tell the judge about the coercion. We will tell them about the blackmail. Predatory lending is illegal. Delaney, we can fight this. You always want to be the righteous one, Delaney spat, pulling away from me. You always want to be the hero in the story. Sloan to the rescue. It is not that simple. He owns the judges. He owns the banks. He is broke, I said. Delaney stopped. What? I heard him, I said, lowering my voice. In the hallway. He is leveraging everything on this deal tonight. He needs Dr. Nasser's money to cover his debts. He is a fraud. Delaney, the billions are on paper. If this deal falls through, he is finished. He isn't a god. He is a gambler on a losing streak. Delaney stared at me. For a second, just a second, I saw a spark of hope in her eyes. It was a terrifying, fragile thing. She looked at me not as the judgmental older sister, but as a lifeline. Is that true? She whispered. Yes, I said. He is weak, and he is terrified. That is why he is gripping you so tight. You are his shield. Delaney's mouth opened. She took a breath. She looked at the door. She looked back at me. Her hands uncurled. Sloane, she said, her voice cracking. Click, clack, click, clack. The sound of footsteps on the marble floor outside the door stopped us both dead. They were heavy, confident steps. The stride of a man who owns the building. Delaney's reaction was instantaneous and horrifying. It was Pavlovian. The hope vanished from her eyes, replaced by a shudder of absolute dissociation. She straightened her spine. She tilted her chin up. She wiped the tear from her cheek with a single, precise motion of her thumb, careful not to smudge the foundation. She picked up the lipstick and capped it. In 3 seconds, my sister disappeared. The mannequin returned. Delaney, I whispered. I have to go, she said. Her voice was unrecognizable. It was smooth, light, and dead. They are cutting the cake soon. Grant hates to wait. Delaney, please, I said, stepping in front of her. Don't go back out there. Move. Sloane, she said. She didn't shout. She didn't plead. She simply issued a command. You are ruining my makeup. The doorknob turned. Delaney sidestepped me and walked toward the door just as it opened. I couldn't see who was outside, but I didn't need to. There you are. My love. Grant's voice floated in, rich and possessive. I was getting worried. You know how I feel about you leaving my side for too long. I am sorry, darling, Delaney said. Her voice was dripping with sugar. Just a touch of powder. I wanted to look perfect for you. You always do, he said. The door closed. I was left alone in the silence of the pink marble room. I looked at myself in the mirror. I saw a woman in a beige dress, a woman who had spent 5 years being safe, a woman who had let her sister drown because she was afraid of the water. Delaney was right. I had been hiding in my books. I had been translating dead languages while living people were screaming for help right in front of me. You always want to be the righteous one, she had said. Maybe she was right about that, too. Maybe I did want to be the hero. But right now, looking at the hollowed-out eyes of my reflection, I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like an accomplice. I thought about the fear in Delaney's eyes before the footsteps. I thought about the way she had looked at me when I told her Grant was broke. She wanted to run. She wanted to escape. But the cage was not just made of debt and threats. It was made of habit. It was made of terror so deep it had rewritten her neural pathways. She couldn't open the door herself. She was too paralyzed. I had told her she had to want to escape, but that wasn't enough. A prisoner can want to escape all day long. But if the guard has a gun, wanting doesn't matter. Someone had to take the gun away. I looked at my watch. It was 9:30. The deal was supposed to close by 10. Grant was desperate. Doctor, Nasser was suspicious, and I was the only one who spoke the language of the battlefield. I washed my hands. The cold water shocked my system. I dried them on a thick linen towel. I was done with the beige dress. I was still wearing it, but I was done inhabiting the spirit of it. I wasn't going to save Delaney by whispering in a bathroom. I wasn't going to save her by running away to Philadelphia. I was going to save her by burning Grant Ashford's reputation to the ground, in front of the only people whose opinion he actually cared about. I took the notebook out of my bag. I ripped out the page where I had written my observations. I crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. I didn't need notes anymore. I knew the script. I opened the mahogany door and stepped back out into the roar of the party. The noise hit me like a physical wave. But this time, I didn't flinch. I walked straight into the current. I walked back to table 19. The distance felt different this time. Before, it had been a walk of shame, a retreat into the shadows. Now, it felt like a tactical repositioning. I sat down next to my mother. Janice was picking at a slice of flourless chocolate cake with the desperate concentration of a woman trying to ignore the fact that her world was held together by Scotch tape and denial. "You look pale," Janice whispered without looking at me. "Put some blush on. You look like a ghost." "Ghosts are useful, Mom," I said, placing my napkin in my lap. "Nobody pays attention to them until they start haunting the house." I poured myself a glass of water. My hands were steady. The conversation with Delaney in the bathroom had stripped away the last layer of my hesitation. I was no longer afraid of ruining the party. I was only afraid of what would happen if the party continued as planned. I looked toward the head table. Grant was laughing, his head thrown back, his hand resting possessively on Delaney's shoulder. He looked like a man who had already won. He was checking his watch every few minutes, his eyes darting toward the table where the international guests sat. Then, something impossible happened. Dr. Layla Nasser stood up. She did not head toward the restrooms. She did not head toward the bar. She picked up her wine glass, smoothed the front of her silver silk jacket, and walked directly across the room. She navigated the sea of tuxedos and designer gowns with the precision of an icebreaker moving through a frozen sea. She was coming toward the kitchen, toward the blind spot, toward me. My mother gasped. "Oh God, did we do something? Why is she coming here? Is my dress wrong?" "Be quiet, Mom," I said softly. "Doctor." Nasser stopped at our table. Up close, she was even more formidable. She had lines around her eyes that spoke of decades of reading fine print and staring down men who thought they could intimidate her. She smelled of sandalwood and old paper. She pulled out the empty chair next to me, the one reserved for my late father, and sat down. The entire back corner of the room seemed to hold its breath. A waiter froze mid-step, balancing a tray of dirty plates. It was unheard of. The whales did not swim with the minnows. "Ms. King." "Doctor," Nasser said. Her voice was low, melodic, and accented with the clipped precision of the Levant. "Doctor, Nasser," I replied, meeting her gaze. "I apologize for the intrusion," she said, ignoring my mother, who was staring at her with her mouth slightly open. "But I found the conversation at my table to be lacking in substance, and I have a question that has been bothering me for the last hour." "How can I help you?" I asked. "Doctor." Nasser took a sip of her wine. 7 years ago, there was a paper published in the Journal of Comparative Commercial Linguistics. It was titled, "The Architecture of Deceit, Semantic Loopholes in Trans-Mediterranean Contracts." The author was listed as King, a doctoral candidate at the University of Bologna. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had not thought about that paper in half a decade. It was a piece of academic obsession, a deep dive into how syntax could be weaponized in bilingual legal documents. "I read it, Doctor," Nasser continued. "I use it as required reading for my junior analysts. The analysis of the passive voice liability shift was brilliant. I assumed the author went on to work for The Hague or the World Bank." She looked at me. She looked at my beige dress. She looked at the service door swinging open behind me. "Imagine my surprise," she said, "when I saw the author fetching a scotch for a man who cannot even pronounce the name of the vintage." I felt a flush rise up my neck. But it wasn't shame. It was the sudden, shocking feeling of being seen. "Life took a detour," I said. "Life is full of detours." "Doctor," Nasser said, "but talent usually finds a way to leave a fingerprint. I recognized your face from the bio page in the journal, and when you spoke that one sentence to Grant earlier, well, that confirmed it. You are not just the sister, you are the expert." She leaned in closer. The social mask dropped. Her eyes became hard and urgent. I need to know something, Ms. King, and I need you to tell me the truth, not the polite answer. Ask, I said. Grant is pushing for us to sign the financing agreement tonight, she said. He says the urgency is due to regulatory changes that go into effect at midnight. The English contract is standard. It looks clean. But there is an addendum. It is written in the old trade dialect, the one he tried to speak earlier. He claims it is just a ceremonial nod to the region's history, a gesture of respect. Grant does not do gestures of respect, I said. Precisely. Doctor, Nasser said. I read the addendum. My grasp of the archaic dialect is good, but it is not academic. There is a phrase in the liability clause. Honoris translatio. The shifting of the burden, I translated instantly. In modern usage, it means the risks are shared, she said. But in the dialect of the High Court period, I said, my mind snapping back into its old rhythm, it implies a total transfer of debt to the guarantor in the event of a force majeure, and since the definition of force majeure in that dialect includes administrative restructuring, he could bankrupt the fund, Doctor, Nasser finished, her eyes narrowing. He could default on the loan, restructure his company, and leave us holding the entire debt bag while he walks away clean. He is trying to trick you, I said. He is banking on the fact that you know the language well enough to be polite, but not well enough to litigate. He is arrogant, Doctor, Nasser murmured. He thinks because I am a woman, and because English is my third language, I will just smile and sign the check. He thinks he is the smartest person in the room, I said. Is he? She asked. I looked at her. Not tonight. Movement to my left caught my eye. A woman in a dark gray pantsuit had drifted toward our table. She didn't sit. She stood near the pillar, looking at her phone, appearing for all the world like a bored staffer checking emails. It was Renee Maddox. I knew who she was. She was the head of legal compliance for Ashford Enterprises. She was a ghost in her own right, always in the background of press photos, always carrying the briefcase, always looking tired. She took a half step closer to the table. She didn't look at us. She spoke to the air. He has the papers in his jacket pocket, Renee said softly. Her voice was barely audible over the music. He switched the pages 10 minutes ago. The version he showed your lawyers earlier is not the version he's going to ask you to sign. Doctor. Nasser didn't turn her head. Do you have proof? I have everything, Renee whispered. She was trembling slightly. I have the emails where he ordered the change. I have the recordings of him threatening the auditors. I have the records of the debts he is hiding. He is insolvent. The company is hollow. Why are you telling us? I asked, looking at the lawyer's profile. Because he told me yesterday that if this deal fails, I am the fall guy, Renee said. Her voice cracked. He's already built a paper trail to pin embezzlement on me. He's going to take me down to protect himself. I need out, but I can't just dump it. If I dump it, he controls the story, calls me a bitter employee, says I tampered with the records. You need someone who can vouch for what you're saying. Doctor, Nasser said, I need it to happen in public, Renee corrected. She turned toward me then, panic bright in her eyes. I need him to do it where everyone can see. I need him to be so obvious, so smug, that when I release the files, no one can twist themselves into defending him. I need him to expose himself. He's about to give a speech, Renee added, flicking her gaze to her watch. He's going to call you up. Sloan, he wants to finish what he started earlier. He wants one last humiliation, something he can perform for the investors to prove how in control he is. In his mind, it's strength. He wants a spectacle. I said, then give him one. Renee said, rattle him, push him off script. If you can get him to admit the translation, if you can get him to claim the contract says one thing when it says another, then I can step in. But you have to bait the trap. Renee turned and walked away, disappearing back into the shadows near the bar. I looked at Dr. Nasser. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a small, heavy cardstock. It was her business card. She slid it across the tablecloth to me. If you stay silent, Doctor, Nasser said. He signs the deal, he gets the money, he buries your family, he buries Renee, and he wins. She tapped the card with a manicured fingernail. But if you speak, she said, if you expose him, I will pull the funding, I will announce it to the room, and I will make sure every bank in this city knows that the King family debt is invalid due to fraud. It was an offer of salvation, but it came with a price. I had to step into the center of the arena. I had to take the microphone. I had to face the man who had owned my family for 5 years and strip him naked with nothing but words. My mother grabbed my arm. Her grip was painful. Sloan, what are they talking about? Why is the lawyer here? Don't do anything crazy. Grant is looking at us. I looked up. Grant was standing at the microphone on the stage. He tapped it twice. Thump, thump. The sound echoed through the hall, silencing the chatter. Ladies and gentlemen, Grant said, his voice booming with charisma. If I could have your attention, he smiled. It was the smile of a tiger looking at a tethered goat. Before we cut the cake, and before we conclude our business for the evening, I want to invite a very special guest to join me up here, Grant said. Someone who has always been a unique part of our family story. He pointed directly at table 19. Sloan, he said. Come on up here. Delaney, standing next to him, looked terrifyingly pale. She stared at me across the room, her eyes wide with panic. She shook her head slightly. Don't come up here. Run. But I wasn't running. I looked at Dr. Nasser. I gave her a single, sharp nod. It wasn't a request for permission. It was a signal. Lock the doors. I stood up. I smoothed the skirt of my beige dress. I picked up my clutch, feeling the weight of the notebook inside it, though I knew I wouldn't need it. Sloan, my mother whispered. What are you doing? I am going to work, Mom. I said. I walked away from the table. I walked past the kitchen doors. I walked past the gatekeepers and the socialites and the senators. I walked toward the stage, my head high, my steps measured. I could feel the eyes of the room on me. I could feel Grant's anticipation radiating from the stage like heat. He thought he was calling a victim to the slaughter. He had no idea he was inviting the executioner to the scaffold. The steps leading up to the stage felt less like walking and more like climbing a scaffold. The carpet was thick, swallowing the sound of my heels. But the silence in the room was louder than any noise. 300 people were watching me. 600 eyes. I could feel the weight of their judgment, heavy and humid, pressing against my skin. Grant Ashford stood at the podium, gripping the microphone stand with one hand and holding a glass of champagne in the other. He looked like a golden idol that had been left out in the sun too long. He was sweating. It was a subtle thing, a sheen on his forehead that the stage lights picked up and magnified. But to me, it was a beacon. He was terrified, and like all terrified men with power, he was looking for a dog to kick to prove he was still the master of the house. I stepped onto the platform. The height difference was jarring. Suddenly, I was looking down at the sea of tuxedos and gowns. I saw the waiters paused in the shadows. I saw Dr. Layla Nasser at her table, her face unreadable, her hand resting near her wineglass like a judge resting a hand near a gavel. Grant did not offer me a hand. He stepped back, giving me center stage. But it was not a gesture of respect. It was the way a ringmaster presents a curiosity. Everyone, please, Grant said into the microphone, his voice booming with forced conviviality. I wanted to bring Sloan up here for a moment. You see, my future sister-in-law is a woman of unique interests. While Delaney and I have been building the future, Sloan has spent her life digging in the dust of the past. A ripple of polite, confused laughter moved through the room. They did not know where this was going, but they knew they were supposed to be amused. She is a translator, Grant continued, casting a conspiratorial wink at the table of international investors. She deals in dead things, dead words, dead cultures. And tonight, I thought it would be amusing to see if she can keep up with the living. He turned to me. His eyes were hard, devoid of the warmth his voice projected. He moved the microphone closer to his lips. "Sloane," he said, "why don't you offer a toast to your sister? But let us make it interesting. Let us see if you can do it in the tongue of our distinguished guest's ancestors, the old trade dialect. Surely, with all your years of study, you can manage a simple blessing." He was setting a trap. He knew I wouldn't speak. He expected me to stutter, to flush, to mumble something in English and look incompetent. He wanted to show Dr. Nasser that the expert she had been talking to was a fraud, a mute little mouse who crumbled under pressure. He didn't wait for me to answer. He decided to demonstrate his own prowess first. He wanted to show the investors that he was one of them. He cleared his throat and spoke in the ancient tongue. "Ancilla, dic verba, fac nos ridere, non habes vocem hic." Servant, speak words. Make us laugh. You have no voice here. The grammar was atrocious. He used a nominative structure where an accusative was required. He used the word ancilla, which specifically meant a female slave, not a servant, and his pronunciation was flat, stripping the musicality from the vowels until they sounded like tin cans hitting a pavement. The room reacted exactly as he had programmed them to. The Americans laughed. They heard the foreign sounds. They saw Grant's confident smirk, and they assumed he had said something witty. My mother laughed the loudest, a desperate, high-pitched sound that made my stomach turn. She was laughing at her own daughter's humiliation because she thought it was the price of admission, but the international table did not laugh. Doctor. Nasser sat perfectly still. The men around her shifted in their seats. They looked down at their plates. To them, this was not a joke. It was a desecration. It was like watching someone spit on a flag. I did not speak. I let the silence stretch. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Grant's smile widened. He thought he had won. He thought my silence was submission. He leaned into the microphone again, ready to deliver the punchline, ready to dismiss me back to the shadows. "You see," he said in English, shrugging his shoulders. "She is shy. The academic world is so quiet. She is not built for the arena." He turned back to me, his voice dropping to a sneer, confident that only the front row could hear him. "Go sit down, Sloane. You are embarrassing yourself." I reached out and took the microphone from his hand. I didn't snatch it. I simply took it. I moved with such deliberate speed that he let go before he realized what was happening. I stepped up to the stand. I looked at Grant. Then I looked at the crowd. Then I looked directly at Dr. Layla Nasser. I opened my mouth. "Tuus usus casus nominativi provocativo error puerilis est," I said. My voice was clear, resonant, and projected to the back of the hall. "Your use of the nominative case instead of the vocative is a childish error." The room went dead silent. The ambient chatter was severed as if by a guillotine. Grant froze. His smile faltered, twitching at the corners. He understood the tone, even if he didn't catch all the words. I didn't stop. I switched to the High Court dialect, the specific register used for legal disputes in the 3rd century Mediterranean trade routes. It was a language of precision, of contracts, of life and death. "Et cum dicis ancilla, obliviceris te non dominum esse," I continued, my diction perfect, rolling the R's and hitting the glottal stops that Grant had ignored. "Ego non sum serva, ego sum testis." And when you say slave, you forget that you are not the master. I am not a servant. I am a witness. I saw the color drain from Grant's face. He looked like a man who had reached for a weapon and found a viper in his holster. He stepped toward me, his hand reaching out to take the microphone back. "That is enough," he hissed in English. "Give me that." I sidestepped him. I was not speaking to him anymore. I was speaking to the investors. I was speaking to the people holding the pen that would sign his survival or his warrant. "You asked for a toast in the language of trade," I said, keeping my voice in the ancient tongue but amplifying my volume. "So let us speak of trade. Let us speak of the Merchant's Code of Tyre. Section 4, Paragraph 2. I saw Dr. Nasser's eyes widen. She sat up straight. She knew exactly what I was quoting. Si mercator onus abscondit, I recited, my memory unlocking the text I had translated 5 years ago, the text that was the foundation of the very fraud Grant was attempting tonight. Si per dolum verba mutat in charta, tunc aurum vertitur incinerem. If the merchant hides the burden, if through deceit he changes the words on the paper, then the gold turns to ash. The translation hung in the air. The men at Dr. Nasser's table were no longer looking at their plates. They were looking at Grant, and they were looking at him with the cold, hard eyes of men who realized they had almost been robbed. Grant understood. He didn't know the full text, but he knew enough. He knew I was talking about the contract. He knew I was talking about the hidden liability clause. He knew I had just told his biggest investors that he was a thief, using the very language he had tried to use to impress them. "She is drunk," Grant shouted, abandoning the microphone and yelling to the crowd. His voice cracked. "She is mentally unstable. Security, get her off the stage." 2 security guards started to move from the back of the room. I switched to English. I did not shout. I dropped my voice to a register that forced everyone to lean in. The acoustics of the room carried it to every corner. "I am not drunk, Grant," I said, "and I am not unstable. I understood every word you said to me. I understood the insult. I understood the grammar. And I understand the addendum to the contract you are trying to force Dr. Nasser to sign tonight." A gasp went through the room. It started at the front tables and rippled backward. This was not a toast. This was a demolition. "I stayed silent earlier because I was raised to be polite," I said, looking at my mother, who was clutching her pearls, her face a mask of horror. "I stayed silent because I thought dignity was quiet. But you mistook my manners for ignorance, and that is a very expensive mistake to make." I looked at Grant. He was trembling now, visibly. His hands were shaking at his sides. He looked at the investors, then at me, then at Delaney. "She is lying," Grant stammered. It is a performance, a joke. We rehearsed this." Nobody laughed. From the table near the front, a sound emerged. Clap. It was slow, deliberate, heavy. Clap, clap. "Doctor." Layla Nasser stood up. She was not applauding the performance. She was applauding the truth. She looked at me with a fierce, burning approval. Then the man next to her stood up. Then the entire international delegation stood up. They were not clapping for Grant. They were clapping for the linguist. They were clapping for the woman in the beige dress who had just saved them $50 million. The applause spread. It wasn't the polite, frantic applause of the sycophants. It was the confused, tentative applause of people who realized the power had shifted but didn't know why. But the investors knew, and their applause was a death knell for Grant's deal. Grant looked at the room. He looked at the people he had spent millions to impress. He saw them looking at me. He lunged. It was a desperate, animalistic movement. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep, forgetting the cameras, forgetting the facade. "You little witch," he snarled into my ear, his breath hot and smelling of sour wine. "You have no idea what you have done. I will ruin you. I will bury you under so much litigation you won't be able to breathe." "Let go of her," a voice said from the floor. It wasn't Delaney. It wasn't my mother. It was Renee Maddox, the lawyer. She had stepped out of the shadows. She was holding up her phone, the red light of the recording app glowing steady and bright. "I have that on record. Mr. Ashford," Renee said calmly. "Physical assault, threat of malicious litigation, and I believe Dr. Nasser has a copy of the fraudulent contract addendum on her table right now." Grant released me as if I were burning. He stumbled back, hitting the podium. The feedback loop screeched through the speakers, a high-pitched wail that made everyone cover their ears. He stood there, alone on the stage, panting. The golden idol was melting. I smoothed my sleeve where he had grabbed me. I looked at him one last time. "You were right about one thing, Grant," I said into the silence that followed the screech. "I do deal in dead things, and I think I am looking at one right now." I placed the microphone back on the stand. It clicked into place with a sound like a lock snapping shut. I turned and walked down the stairs. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The silence in the room wasn't heavy anymore. It was electric, and for the first time in 5 years, the air in my lungs felt clean. I walked toward Dr. Nasser's table. The path was clear. People pulled their chairs in to let me pass, the gatekeepers of the Beaumont Athenaeum, who had sneered at my dress an hour ago, were looking at me with something new. Fear. I had silenced the room, but the night wasn't over. Grant was wounded, and wounded animals are dangerous. He wouldn't go down with just a contract dispute. He would try to tear the whole building down on top of us. I was ready. The beige dress was gone. The armor was on. And I had the biggest weapon in the room sitting right there at table 1, waiting for me to give the order. Grant did not remain on the stage. He realized that the podium, which had been his throne moments ago, was now his cage. He descended the stairs, not with the regal grace he had entered with, but with the frantic energy of a man whose house is burning down. He abandoned the microphone, his voice rising naturally to a shout that carried over the stunned silence of the room. "Security!" Grant bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Seize her! Do not let her leave the building." The room gasped. The guests, who had been witnessing a linguistic debate, were now watching a manhunt. 2 burly men in dark suits materialized from the perimeter, their hands hovering near their earpieces, their eyes locking onto me as the target. Grant stormed toward me. His face flushed a deep, mottled red. He stopped 10 feet away, creating a perimeter of accusation. "This is not a sister protecting her family," Grant announced to the room, spinning around to address the investors, the senators, and the board members. "This is corporate espionage, plain and simple." He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and triumph. He had found his angle. If he could not outsmart me, he would criminalize me. "She is a plant," Grant declared, his voice gaining confidence as he improvised the lie. "She has been working for a rival firm. We have suspected it for weeks. That is why she is here. That is why she was lurking in the service corridors. She is not a translator. She is a saboteur sent to tank this deal and devalue our stock." It was a ridiculous accusation, but in the high-stakes atmosphere of DRC, the word espionage was a magic spell. It turned confusion into suspicion instantly. People stepped back from me. The waiters froze. "He is right," a cold voice cut in. Edwin Ashford stepped forward, flanking his son. The older man's face was a mask of granite. He looked at me with eyes that were dead and calculating. He didn't care if the lie was true. He only cared that it was useful. "I saw her myself," Edwin said, addressing the room with the gravitas of a patriarch. "Earlier this evening, she was loitering near the service entrance, listening to private conversations. She was taking notes in a black book. I asked her what she wanted, and she was evasive. She clearly had an agenda. And she was asking the staff questions," Celeste Ashford added, gliding to her husband's side, her voice trembling with feigned victimization. "She was interrogating the waiters about our security protocols. I thought she was just being difficult, but now, oh, it makes so much sense. She wanted to ruin Delaney's night because she is being paid to do it." It was a masterclass in gaslighting. Within 30 seconds, they had rewritten reality. They had turned my concern into malice and my observation into surveillance. The security guards closed the distance. One of them, a man with a scar on his chin, reached for my elbow. "Ma'am, you need to come with us," he grunted. "Don't touch me," I said. I didn't shout. I stood my ground, keeping my hands visible. "If you touch me, you are opening yourself up to a lawsuit you cannot afford." The guard hesitated, looking at Grant for confirmation. "Take her," Grant screamed. "She has proprietary information on her person. Search her bag." "Sloan, please." My mother threw herself at me. She grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin through the fabric of the beige dress. Her face was a ruin of running mascara and terror. "Just apologize," Janice begged, shaking me. "Tell them it was a joke. Tell them you didn't mean it. You are ruining everything. They are going to arrest you. Sloan. Do you understand? They will put you in prison. Mom, let go, I said, trying to pry her fingers off. He is lying. You know he is lying. It doesn't matter, she hissed, her voice dropping to a frantic whisper. Just fix it. Kneel down if you have to save the family. I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had birthed me, and I realized with a final, crushing clarity that she would happily watch me be handcuffed and dragged away if it meant she could keep her condo and her credit limit. She wasn't protecting me from the police. She was protecting herself from the truth. No, I said. I pulled my arm free with a sharp jerk. Janice stumbled back, looking at me as if I had struck her. Delaney, Grant shouted, turning his attention to the one person who hadn't moved. Tell them your sister has been jealous of us from the start. Tell them she has been trying to sabotage our happiness because she is a bitter, lonely failure. Delaney stood in the center of the chaos. She looked like a deer caught between two speeding trucks. Her eyes darted from Grant, who was demanding her soul, to me, who was demanding her courage. Delaney started. Her voice was a whisper. Speak up, Grant commanded. Tell them who she really is. Delaney looked at me. I saw the war in her eyes. The fear was still there, massive and paralyzing. But underneath it, something else was waking up. She had seen him humiliate me. She had seen him lie. And now, she was seeing him try to send her own sister to jail to cover his own incompetence. Delaney stammered. She took a breath. She isn't a spy. Grant. The room went quiet again. It wasn't the silence of respect. It was the silence of a bomb not going off when expected. Grant stared at her. What did you say? She isn't a spy, Delaney repeated, her voice shaking but audible. She is my sister, and she is a translator. She doesn't work for a competitor. She works for a translation bureau in Philadelphia. She barely leaves her apartment. You are hysterical, Grant snapped, cutting her off. You don't know what she does when you aren't looking. She has fooled you too. Delaney, that is how good she is. He turned back to me. Realizing he was losing control of the narrative again, he needed to crush me, and he needed to do it now. He stepped into my personal space. He was close enough that I could see the broken veins in his eyes. He lowered his voice, but in the acoustics of the ballroom, it carried like a hiss. You think you are clever, Grant said. You think because you know a few dead words you can walk into my world and dictate terms I will bury you. Sloan, I will make sure you never translate another sentence as long as you live. I will call every publisher, every agency, every academic board in this country. I will paint you as a lunatic and a thief. You will be unhireable. You will starve. He smiled, and it was the ugliest thing I had ever seen. I have more lawyers on retainer than you have dollars in your bank account, he whispered. I will drown you in legal fees. I will take your mother's apartment. I will leave you with nothing but the clothes on your back. Walk out now. Admit you lied, and maybe I will let you keep your dignity. It was the classic move, the rich man's checkmate, destruction by attrition. He didn't need to be right. He just needed to be richer. Is that a threat, Mr. Ashford? The voice came from the shadows near the bar. Renee Maddox stepped forward. She held her phone up high, the screen glowing. Because if it is, Renee continued, her voice steady and clear, I feel obligated to inform you that I have been recording this entire interaction for the last 5 minutes. I have the accusation of espionage. I have the instruction to security to detain a guest without cause. And I definitely have the threat to maliciously destroy Miss King's livelihood using corporate resources. Grant spun around. Renee, what are you doing? Put that phone away or you are fired. I am already fired. Grant, Renee said, walking closer until she stood next to me. Or I will be, as soon as I file the whistleblower complaint I drafted this morning. You can't fire a compliance officer for documenting non-compliance. It is against the law, and so is framing an innocent woman to cover up securities fraud. Grant looked like he had been punched in the gut. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Then, The final hammer fell. "Doctor?" Layla Nasser stood up. She didn't shout. She didn't wave a phone. She simply picked up her clutch bag and walked toward us. The international delegation rose with her, a silent phalanx of power. She stopped in front of the security guard who was still hovering near me. She looked at him. She didn't say a word. She just looked at him with the authority of a woman who managed sovereign wealth funds. The guard stepped back, lowering his hands. Layla turned to Grant. "Mr. Ashford," she said. Her voice was ice. "If you, or your security, or your lawyers, touch one hair on this woman's head, the deal is not just off, it is incinerated." "Dr. Nasser, please," Grant stammered, his hands fluttering. "You are being manipulated. She is an actress. She memorized those lines. Someone paid her to stage this. Can't you see? It is a performance." He pointed at Renee. "And her. She is a disgruntled employee. I was about to fire her for incompetence. They are working together to extort me." He was spiraling. He was throwing every accusation he could think of against the wall, hoping something, anything would stick. "She doesn't know the dialect," Grant insisted, his eyes wild. "She just learned a few phrases to trick you. It is a parlor trick." I laughed. It was a short, dry sound. "A parlor trick," I repeated. I looked at Grant. I looked at the sweat dripping down his temple. I looked at the way his hands were shaking. "Okay, Grant," I said. "Let us assume you are right. Let us assume I am a spy. Let us assume I am a plant sent here to destroy you." I took a step forward. He took a step back. "If I am a spy," I asked, my voice ringing out clearly in the silent room, "and if the details of this financing deal are so secret, so sensitive, that you have to use a dead language to hide them." I paused. I let the question hang there. "Then why?" I continued. "Were you discussing the liquidity crisis and Dr. Nasser's hesitation in the service hallway, loud enough for the catering staff to hear you?" The room went deadly still. Grant's mouth opened and closed. "I heard you," I said. "The waiter heard you. You were shouting into your phone about how you needed the money by midnight to cover the bridge loan. You were screaming that you would bury Dr. Nasser if she didn't sign." I turned to the audience. "Real spies don't need to hide in the shadows when the target is broadcasting his secrets in the corridor," I said. "He isn't afraid of espionage. Everyone, he is afraid of visibility. He is afraid that if you look closely enough, you will see that the emperor has no clothes, no money, and no honor." I looked back at Grant. "You aren't a victim, Grant," I said softly. "You are just loud." The silence that followed was total. It was the silence of a verdict being read. Grant Ashford looked around the room. He saw the faces of the senators, the investors, the partners. He saw the doubt. He saw the disgust. He saw the realization dawning on 300 people simultaneously he was a fraud. He looked at his father. Edwin Ashford turned his back on him. He looked at his mother. Celeste was staring at the floor. He looked at Delaney. Delaney was looking at me. And for the first time in 5 years, she wasn't looking at her shoes. She was standing straight. Grant had tried to frame me. He had tried to threaten me. But all he had done was hand me the microphone and turn up the volume. He had wanted to bury me. But he had forgotten the most important rule of digging a grave: make sure you aren't standing in it when the dirt comes down. The silence in the ballroom was not empty. It was heavy, filled with the crushing weight of realization. Grant Ashford stood alone in the center of the floor, stripped of his golden armor, looking frantically from face to face, searching for an ally who was no longer there. "Doctor." Layla Nasser did not give him time to recover. She reached into her leather portfolio and withdrew a single, crisp document. It was the addendum. The piece of paper that was supposed to save Grant's empire was about to become his death warrant. "Bring it here," Layla commanded. She did not shout, but her voice carried the authority of a woman who moved markets with a phone call. She placed the document on the white tablecloth of table 1, right next to the untouched centerpiece of white roses. "Sloan," Layla said. looking at me. Translate, line 4, the repayment clause. I walked over to the table. The crowd parted for me. I was no longer the invisible sister in the beige dress. I was the expert witness. I looked down at the document. It was written in the old trade dialect, the script elegant and deceptive. Grant lunged forward, his face pale. "You cannot do this. That is proprietary information. That is a confidential draft." "It is a fraud attempt," I said, my voice cutting through his panic. I placed my finger on the specific line of text. "Right here, Clause 4. I looked up at the investors gathered around the table. "In standard contract law," I explained, projecting my voice clearly, "a borrower has an obligation to repay the principal in the event of a liquidity freeze. It is mandatory. It protects the lender." I tapped the paper. "But Grant did not use the word obligatio," I said. "He used the term arbitrium." A gasp went through the international delegation. They knew the word. "In modern usage, arbitrium can mean judgment or decision," I continued. "But in the specific high court commercial dialect of the 3rd century, which this contract mimics, arbitrium has a very specific legal definition. It means at the pleasure of, it turns a mandatory repayment into a discretionary option." I looked directly at Grant. "He rewrote the contract so that if his company goes under, he does not have to pay you back a single dime unless he feels like it," I said. "He made investor protection optional. He tried to steal $50 million by changing one word." "Doctor." Nasser looked at the document. She looked at the word. She looked at Grant. "It is true," she whispered. The realization was absolute. She pulled a fountain pen from her pocket, uncapped it, and drew a thick, black line through the signature block. "The deal is dead," Layla announced, standing up, "and my legal team is receiving a digital copy of this document as we speak. We are filing for attempted securities fraud in the morning." Grant staggered back as if he had been physically struck. "Layla, wait, please. It is a misunderstanding. It is a typo. I can fix it." "You cannot fix character," Layla said coldly. Then, the second blow landed. Edwin Ashford stepped forward. I expected him to defend his son. I expected him to rage against the injustice of it all. But Edwin was a businessman before he was a father, and he had just watched his son incinerate the family legacy. "You idiot!" Edwin hissed. The room went quiet. "Father," Grant pleaded, reaching out. "They are lying. You have to believe me." "I believe the money," Edwin said, his voice dripping with venom. "I believe the fact that you just cost this family its liquidity leverage. I do not care that you were cruel to the girl. I do not care that you are a bully. I care that you are incompetent." He looked at Grant with pure disgust. "You tried to play a game you were not smart enough to win," Edwin said. "And you did it in public. You have embarrassed the Ashford name. Get out of my sight." Grant looked destroyed. His father had not rejected him for being a monster. He had rejected him for being a failure. It was the only sin that mattered in their world. "This isn't over," Grant screamed, spinning around, his eyes wild. "I will sue you all. I will destroy you. Renee. Where is Renee? I want injunctions filed tonight." Renee Maddox stepped out from behind me. She placed a small USB drive on the table next to the ruined contract. "I am right here." "Grant," Renee said. Her voice was shaking, but her chin was high. "And I am not filing any injunctions for you. I am filing my resignation. And this drive contains the unedited audio of you threatening to frame me for embezzlement, along with the emails where you ordered me to hide the debt." She looked at him with a mixture of pity and revulsion. "If you try to come after Sloan, or her family, or me," Renee said, "I will take the stand. I will play the tapes for the jury myself." Grant stood panting in the center of the room. He was surrounded. The investors had turned on him. His lawyer had turned on him. His father had turned on him. He had no cards left to play. So he turned to the only person he thought he still owned. He turned to Delaney. My sister was standing near the table, her hands clasped in front of her. She looked like she was waking up from a long, dark coma. "Delaney," Grant said. His voice changed. It became dark, threatening. The voice of the abuser who realizes his victim is the only thing he has left to control. "We are leaving. Now." Delaney did not move. "Did you hear me?" Grant snarled, stepping toward her. "I said we are leaving. You are coming with me. You are my fiancé." "No," Delaney said. It was a small word, but it hit him like a brick. "What did you say?" Grant whispered. "I said no," Delaney said louder. She looked him in the eye. "I am not going anywhere with you," Grant laughed. It was a manic, ugly sound. "You have to come with me. Look at you. You are nothing without me. I bought you. I bought your house. I bought your clothes. Without me, you are just a bankrupt little girl from Philadelphia. You are a zero. Delaney, a zero." The insult hung in the air, gross and heavy. Delaney looked at him, and for the first time, she smiled. But it wasn't the fake, locked smile she had worn all night. It was a real, sad smile. "Maybe," Delaney said softly. "But at least I am not a fraud." She raised her left hand. She gripped the massive diamond ring that had been her shackle for 2 years. She twisted it. It was tight, but she pulled. She slid the ring off her finger. She didn't throw it at him. She didn't make a scene. She simply leaned forward and placed it on the table, right next to the dead contract. It made a sharp clack against the wood. "I am done being your asset," Delaney said. She turned around and walked over to me. She stood next to me, shoulder to shoulder. She took my hand. Her palm was cold, but her grip was strong. We stood there, the invisible sister and the trophy wife, finally united. Grant looked at us. He looked at the ring. He looked at the room full of people who were now staring at him with open contempt. "Janice," Grant shouted, looking for one last lever to pull. "Tell them. Tell your daughters to stop this. Think about the debt. Think about the apartment. I will take it all back." My mother stepped forward. Janice King looked at the man she had practically worshipped for 5 years. She looked at the diamond ring on the table. Then she looked at us. She looked at Delaney's shaking shoulders and my defiant face. For years, Janice had chosen safety over truth. She had chosen comfort over dignity. But watching Grant scream that her daughter was a zero, something in her finally broke. Or maybe, something finally healed. Janice didn't say a word. She simply walked past Grant as if he were a piece of furniture. She came to stand beside us. She put her arm around Delaney. She put her other hand on my shoulder. It was a small gesture, but in the context of our history, it was an earthquake. She had chosen her children over the checkbook. Grant was alone, truly, finally alone. He opened his mouth to scream again, to threaten, to bluster. "Grant," I said. My voice was calm. I didn't need to shout anymore. I didn't need the microphone. "Stop," I said. "It is over. You did this," he spat at me, tears of rage streaming down his face. "You ruined my life. You destroyed everything." "No," I said, shaking my head. "I didn't destroy you. I just turned on the lights. You destroyed yourself the moment you thought you were above the truth." I looked at the guests. "Good night," I said. I turned my back on him. Delaney turned with me. Janice turned with us. We walked out of the Beaumont Athenaeum together. We walked past the stunned waiters. We walked past the gatekeeper who had sneered at me. We walked out the heavy double doors and into the cool night air of Washington, D.C. Behind us, the sound of chaos erupted as the investors descended on Edwin Ashford, demanding answers. But we didn't look back. We had a train to catch. Epilogue. 3 months later, the office of the Maritime Lexicon Institute in Boston smelled of salt air and old parchment. It was a far cry from my cramped apartment in Philadelphia, and an entire universe away from the gilded cage of the Beaumont Athenaeum. I sat at my desk, reviewing a translation of a 17th-century shipping manifest, My title was Director of Historical Linguistics. It was a real job, with a real salary, and real respect. Doctor. Nasser had made the introduction a week after the party. She told the board that anyone who could dismantle a billion-dollar fraud with a grammar lesson deserved tenure. I picked up my phone. There was a text from Delaney. Got the keys to the new place. It is small. The radiator clanks. I love it. I smiled. Delaney was working as a junior event coordinator for a nonprofit. She was making $30,000 a year. She bought her own clothes at thrift stores. She had cut her hair short. She looked 10 years younger. The debt was gone. It hadn't been paid off with cash. It had been paid off with leverage. Renee Maddox had brokered the deal. We had agreed not to release the full audio recordings of Grant's threats to the press, and in exchange, the Ashford family had forgiven the $4 million debt in its entirety. They called it a severance package. We called it freedom. Edwin Ashford had wanted to fight, but the threat of a public trial that would expose his son's incompetence to the global market was too high a price. He signed the release papers with a pen that probably cost more than my car. Grant Ashford had vanished from the social scene. The deal with Dr. Nasser's fund had collapsed publicly. His company's stock had plummeted 40% in one day. He was forced out as CEO by his own father. The last I heard, he was living in a guest house in the Hamptons, spending his days with lawyers, fighting off lawsuits from 3 different investor groups. He had become a cautionary tale in the business schools. They didn't teach his strategies. They taught his failure. They taught that arrogance is a liability, and that you should never, ever assume the person standing in the corner doesn't understand what you are saying. I put down the phone and looked out the window at the harbor. The water was gray and choppy, but the sun was breaking through the clouds. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't the stain on the tablecloth. I was Sloane King. I was the woman who spoke the truth when everyone else was afraid of the noise. And the best part, I finally had a sentence that started with I am happy. Thank you so much for listening to this story. Please leave a comment down below telling me where you are listening from. I would love to hear your thoughts and connect with you all. Do not forget to subscribe to the channel Helena Revenge Stories, like this video, and smash that hype button so this story can reach even more people.